darkness. Keep pushing through the gloom. Greetings everyone, and welcome to History's Dark Chronicles. I'm Alan G, and I'll be guiding you through today's tales. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss a future episode. Our very first installment carries a distinctly supernatural flavor. A young lady, pregnant and lovesick, goes looking for comfort from the man she adores, only to face rejection and utter abandonment, quite literally. In the end, this single event would open a strange and revealing window into the paranormal, touching on hauntings, demonic possession, and eerie premonitions. Another story revolves around the notion that a secluded house, rumored to be occupied by Satanists, held riches beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Deep in the remote woodlands of a southern state, a peculiar dwelling rose up from the forest floor. Two men entangled in a romantic relationship find themselves caught up in uncanny happenings within a woodland retreat. Those same two men would later become the focal points of one of criminal history's most bizarre cases. Heat. On the first morning of February 1896, a 17-year-old farmhand by the name of John Juan stumbled upon something that would torment northern Kentucky for years to come. In an orchard less than 2 miles from the future site of Bob B. Mackey's, he came across a woman's body lying amid the undergrowth. Her dress was torn, her frame slumped awkwardly against a fence, and her head was entirely absent. The remains belonged to Pearl Bryan, a 22-year-old Sunday school instructor from Greencastle, Indiana. She had been 5 months pregnant when she departed home on January 28, telling her parents she was off to see friends in Indianapolis. In reality, she traveled to Cincinnati to rendezvous with Scott Jackson, a dental student at the Ohio College of Dental Surgery, with whom she'd been carrying on a clandestine romance. Pearl was the youngest of 12 children born to Alexander S. Bryan and Susan J. Bryan, a highly regarded farming family in Greencastle. She had graduated from Greencastle High School in 1892 with top honors, earning a special place in the hearts of her classmates. Beautiful, talented, and well-schooled, Pearl attracted plenty of suitors among Greencastle's young men. But none stole her heart until she crossed paths with Scott Jackson in the spring of 1895. Jackson came from a prominent lineage. His father, Commodore Jackson, commanded numerous vessels and held a lofty position in New Jersey's social circles. Yet Scott's past concealed darker secrets. He had narrowly escaped imprisonment for embezzling $32,000 from the Pennsylvania Railroad Company by testifying against his partner, Alexander Leeds, in exchange for immunity. Despite this shady history, which never reached Greencastle, Jackson was received into the Bryan household as a gentleman of respectable standing. To Pearl's parents, their courtship appeared harmless enough. Jackson would borrow Will Wood's horse and buggy to take Pearl on scenic drives through the countryside. But away from prying eyes, their relationship had grown intimate. By September 1895, Pearl realized she was pregnant. When Jackson departed for dental school in Cincinnati that October, Pearl's condition became increasingly hard to conceal. In desperation, she confided in her cousin, Will Wood, who would later testify about the heartbreaking chain of events that followed. Jackson initially tried managing the situation from afar. He sent Pearl various substances meant to trigger a miscarriage, prescriptions and remedies that Wood would pass along to her. When these proved ineffective, Jackson suggested more drastic measures. Wood testified that Jackson claimed such procedures were performed daily and that, given the right instruments, he could carry one out himself. On January 25, 1896, Pearl received a letter from Jackson saying he'd arranged a room in Cincinnati, where the operation could take place. Wood delivered the letter to Pearl, and she expressed relief at finally having a way out of her predicament. She informed her parents she was visiting the Bishop family at 95 Center Street in Indianapolis, packed her belongings, including her graduation dress, and boarded the 1935 eastbound train on January 27. Jackson and his roommate, Alonzo Walling, met Pearl in Cincinnati. Walling also hailed from Indiana, though from more modest origins than Jackson. His father had died when he was 3, and his mother had sacrificed enormously to send him to dental school. The two had met at Indiana Dental College before both transferring to Cincinnati. What occurred next remains partly shrouded in mystery, but witness accounts and trial evidence painted a grim picture. On Friday evening, January 31, Jackson brought Pearl to the Wallingford Saloon at the corner of George and Plum Streets, a spot in Cincinnati's infamous red light district where brothels and gambling dens operated openly. The saloon's owner, David Wallingford, later testified that Jackson arrived with Pearl and Walling around 7:00 p.m. They retired to a back sitting room, where Jackson ordered whiskey for himself and sarsaparilla for Pearl. The black porter, Alan Johnson, recalled the night vividly because he had plans with his own girlfriend that evening. He saw all three depart in a carriage, with Walling seated on the box beside the driver. George H. Jackson, a black coachman unrelated to Scott, provided the most chilling testimony. He stated that Walling had approached him the previous night at George and Elm Streets, offering $5 to drive a cab across the Newport Bridge. On Friday evening, he met them as arranged. Walling gave him specific instructions, climbing up onto the box beside him as they crossed into Kentucky. During the ride, the coachman heard disturbing sounds from inside the carriage. A woman was moaning in pain and distress. The carriage shook violently, and he heard glass breaking. Frightened, he started to jump down, but Walling drew a gun and threatened to blow him to hell if he didn't keep driving. They stopped near Fort Thomas, where Jackson emerged and helped the woman out, with Walling supporting her other side. The coachman was ordered to drive down the hill, turn around, and wait for a whistle. As he turned the carriage, he saw 3 figures climbing over a fence into an orchard. Terrified of being framed for whatever was unfolding, a legitimate fear for a black man in 1896 Kentucky, he fled, leaving the horse tied to a post. The site where Pearl died told its own gruesome story. Detective Cal Krim of Cincinnati, one of the first investigators on the scene, described finding blood everywhere, on the ground, splattered across bushes, and soaked into the earth to a depth of 8 or 9 inches. The pattern suggested Pearl had initially walked beside her attacker, before suddenly breaking into a run across a muddy area she would have avoided had she time to choose her path. Her attacker caught up quickly. The torn piece of her dress hanging from nearby brush showed where he grabbed her. Defensive wounds on her left hand revealed she'd fought desperately, gripping the blade and cutting her fingers to the bone 3 times as she tried to stop it. The coroner, Dr. Tingley, made several critical observations. The head had been severed fairly high, with a knife striking the vertebrae before angling slightly downward. The work displayed medical expertise. The cut had been made from behind, between the 5th and 6th vertebrae, in a manner suggesting anatomical knowledge. Most horrifying was his conclusion about the timing. Pearl Bryan had been alive when the decapitation began. The massive blood loss and spray patterns could only have occurred while her heart was still beating. She had died not from poison or strangulation, but from having her head slowly severed with dental tools. The body discovered by John Hewing that Saturday morning was headless and initially unidentifiable. Pearl wore a light blue and white checked cotton dress, a dark blue skirt, and a union suit of underwear. Her black cloth top shoes, however, would prove her undoing, or rather, her killer's. In an impressive feat of detective work, investigators noted the shoes bore the marking Lewis and Hayes, Greencastle, Indiana 22-11-62-458. Cincinnati detectives Krim and McDurr, along with Sheriff Joel Plumber of Campbell County, traveled to Greencastle to trace the purchase. LD, a Newport shoe merchant, had already conducted his own investigation. He recognized the manufacturing style as that of Drew and Selby and Company of Portsmouth, Ohio. Further inquiry revealed that Lewis and Hayes had ordered 12 pairs of black cloth, top-button shoes on April 18, 1895. Of these, only 1 pair was marked 2011, a size 3 shoe with an unusually narrow width. The trail led directly to Pearl Bryan. Her sister Mary Stanley and mother came to Newport to identify the clothing. Through sobs, Mrs. Bryan recognized each item. The dress had been remade from one belonging to Pearl's deceased sister. Even the hairpins were identified, 2 gold-plated and 2 rubber ones of an auburn hue. Meanwhile, A.W. Early, manager of the Western Union office in Greencastle, had noticed something suspicious. Fred Bryan, Pearl's brother, had sent a telegram to Indianapolis asking if Pearl was visiting friends there. The reply came back negative. Pearl had never arrived. Early, who knew both Will Wood and Scott Jackson, pieced the clues together and alerted the authorities. On February 5, 1896, police arrested Scott Jackson as he walked near his boarding house at 222 West 9th Street in Cincinnati. Under interrogation by Mayor John Caldwell and Police Chief Philip Deach, Jackson initially denied everything. He claimed he hadn't seen Pearl since January 2 in Greencastle. But faced with mounting evidence, his story began to shift. Alonzo Walling was arrested at 3:30 a.m. on February 6, after Jackson let slip that he wondered why Walling hadn't been picked up yet. Under questioning, Walling made a series of damaging admissions. He told investigators that on Christmas Day, Jackson had drawn him into a corner of their room and confessed that he'd gotten Pearl Bryan pregnant and needed to get rid of her. According to Walling, Jackson had proposed 2 plans: taking Pearl to a room, poisoning her with cocaine, and leaving her there, or cutting her into pieces and depositing them in various vaults around the city. Jackson had studied a medical dictionary to learn about poisons and had specifically asked physicians about cocaine's effects. He purchased the drug from Cobalt's drugstore on 6th Street, dissolving it in water to paralyze her vocal organs before cutting off her head. The physical evidence piled up quickly. A blood-stained valise was found at John Coughlин's saloon at 9th and Central. Coughlin testified that Jackson had left it there Monday night, saying he'd retrieve it the next day. When opened in Jackson's presence, he turned deathly pale and admitted it looked like blood inside. Chief Deitch pressed him about whether it had carried Pearl's head. Jackson's response was telling. He said Walling had carried it and that the head was now in the river. More evidence surfaced from their room in the dental college. In Jackson's locker, investigators found a pair of trousers with dried mud on the knees and bloodstains on the legs. Behind Jackson's trunk in their room, detectives found ladies' stockings and a pocketbook containing a piece of gold chain. A coat was recovered from a sewer on Richmond Street, where Walling said Jackson had told him to dispose of it. It too was blood-stained, with tansy leaves in the pocket. Tansy tea was commonly used to induce miscarriages. The trial of Scott Jackson began April 21, 1896 in Newport. The courthouse was so packed that tickets were sold for admission, with over 5,000 people gathered outside for news. The seated jury included grocers, plumbers, carpenters, and merchants, ordinary men tasked with judging an extraordinary crime. The prosecution presented a devastating case. Will Wood testified about introducing Jackson to Pearl, about Jackson's confession that he'd betrayed her, and about the various attempts to end her pregnancy. Wood produced a letter from Jackson dated February 5, the day of his arrest, asking Wood to forge a letter from Pearl to her parents saying she'd gone to Chicago. The letter read, "Write a letter home signed by Bert's name, telling the folks that he is somewhere and going to Chicago or some other place, has a position etc. Say. Tired of living at home or anything you want. You know about the way he writes." Bert was their nickname for Pearl. Alan Johnson, the porter from Wallingford's saloon, identified Pearl's clothing and testified about seeing the three leave together on the fatal night. George H. Jackson, the coachman, provided his harrowing account of the ride to Fort Thomas, including Walling's death threat and the sounds of Pearl's distress. Perhaps most damaging was the testimony about Jackson's preparation for murder. Multiple witnesses confirmed he'd been asking about poisons for weeks before Pearl's arrival. He'd purchased cocaine and had been seen with a fine dissecting knife. The prosecution argued this was never about an abortion. It was always about murder. The defense tried various strategies. They produced William Trusty, who claimed to have driven the cab and said Pearl was already dead when transported, killed by a botched abortion. But Trusty's story fell apart under scrutiny, and he fled town immediately after testifying. Jackson himself took the stand, maintaining his innocence with what observers called natural shrewdness. He claimed Pearl's belongings were in his possession, because he was trying to find her a place to stay. He accused Walling of the actual murder. His testimony was smooth and confident, but the evidence was overwhelming. On May 14, 1896, after brief deliberation, the jury returned a verdict guilty of murder in the first degree. Walling's trial followed a similar pattern, though he maintained to the end that while he knew of Jackson's plans, he hadn't participated in the actual murder. He was also convicted and sentenced to death. The execution was set for March 20, 1897. Both men spent their last night differently. Walling slept while Jackson stayed awake joking with guards. That morning, Jackson made a last-minute attempt to save his roommate, writing to the governor that Walling is not guilty of the crime. "I am." But when pressed for details that would prove Walling's innocence, Jackson refused. When the mayor asked Walling one final time where Pearl's head was hidden, he insisted he didn't know and wouldn't lie, even to save his life. Both men were hanged simultaneously at 11:30 a.m. behind the Newport courthouse. Neither neck broke in the fall. Both slowly strangled to death over several minutes. According to witnesses, Walling's last words included a vow to haunt the area where Pearl's head was hidden and all those involved in his prosecution. Pearl's headless body was returned to Greencastle for burial on March 27, 1896. She was dressed in her white graduation gown and laid to rest in Forest Hill Cemetery on the highest point, where her parents could see her grave from their home. Hundreds attended, including her entire graduating class, who served as pallbearers. But the story didn't end with the execution. Within days, reporters noted that an evil eye seemed to have fallen on those connected to the case. Several police officials and attorneys involved met with bad luck and tragic ends. The legend of Pearl Bryan and her missing head began to grow, fueled by folk songs that emerged within a decade of her death. The building that would become Bobby Mackey's music world had its own dark history that predated Pearl's murder. Built in the 1850s as one of the largest slaughterhouses in the region, it processed countless animals over several decades. The key feature that would later fuel supernatural speculation was the well in the basement. A deep shaft designed to drain blood and refuse from the killing floor. According to period accounts, The blood from the slaughterhouse would flow so heavily that it turned the nearby Licking River red. The well had to be deep to handle the volume, boring down through the limestone bedrock. When the slaughterhouse closed in the early 1890s, this blood-soaked pit remained. Local legend, impossible to verify but persistent in its telling, claims that after the slaughterhouse closed, a cult began using the abandoned building for rituals. The idea wasn't entirely far-fetched for the era. The late 1800s saw a surge of interest in spiritualism and the occult across America. The blood-saturated well would have held symbolic significance for such groups. The connection to Pearl Bryan's murder comes through Scott Jackson's alleged membership in this occult group. While the trial focused on the pregnancy as motive, local storytellers suggest a darker purpose that Pearl was chosen as a sacrifice, her head reserved for ritual use before being disposed of in the well. By the 1920s, the former slaughterhouse had been converted into a distillery and speakeasy. Prohibition had turned northern Kentucky into a smuggling hub, with illegal alcohol flowing across the river from Cincinnati. The building's isolated location above the railroad tracks made it perfect for illicit operations. Violence was endemic to the bootlegging trade. Though specific incidents from this era are poorly documented, the building developed a reputation as a place where problems were solved permanently. Bodies allegedly disappeared into the river or were transported elsewhere to avoid attracting police attention to the operation. E.A. Buck Brady purchased the property in the 1940s as Prohibition ended. A successful bootlegger looking to go legitimate, Brady saw potential in the building's location and layout. He invested heavily in renovations, transforming it into the Primrose Club, an upscale gambling establishment that would soon attract the wrong kind of attention. Brady's Primrose Club was too successful for its own good. By 1946, it was cutting into the profits of mob-controlled casinos in Newport. The Cleveland Four-Crime Syndicate, which controlled much of the region's illegal gambling, sent Red Masterson to convince Brady to sell or partner with them. The confrontation between Brady and Masterson became the stuff of local legend. When Masterson showed up to negotiate, Brady was ready with a shotgun. He shot Masterson in the leg, leading to his arrest for assault. At trial, Masterson refused to identify Brady as his attacker, not from kindness, but because the mob preferred to handle such matters privately. After beating the charges, Brady knew his time was running out. The mob had made it clear that refusing their offer was hazardous to his health. He sold the Primrose and fled to Florida, where he would commit suicide in 1965. Before leaving, however, local legend says Brady cursed the building, vowing that those who profited from it would meet bad ends. The mob reopened the building in 1947 as the Latin Quarter, a significant upgrade from the Primrose. The main floor featured fine dining, quality entertainment, and beautiful hostesses. Gaming tables and slots occupied side rooms, while the basement was converted into dressing rooms for performers. A small stone cell was constructed to deal with problem gamblers who couldn't pay their debts. One Latin Quarter employee later testified about the cell's purpose. Those who owed money would be held there until they could arrange payment or convince someone else to cover their debt. Those who couldn't sometimes didn't leave the building alive. The basement's proximity to the old well made body disposal convenient, though most corpses were allegedly transported elsewhere. Throughout the 1950s, Newport police routinely raided the Latin Quarter. Officers would arrive with sledgehammers, breaking through walls to find hidden gaming equipment. The cat and mouse game continued for years, with the mob rebuilding after each raid. But increased federal attention to organized crime eventually made the operation untenable. The Latin Quarter closed in 1961. Among the ghosts said to haunt Bobby Mackey's, none was more prominent than Johanna. According to the legend, she was a dancer at the Latin Quarter whose father was connected to the mob. She fell in love with Robert Randall, one of the club's singers, a relationship her father violently opposed. The story goes that when Johanna's father discovered she was pregnant with Robert's child, he had the singer murdered. Different versions describe different methods: hanging in the dressing room, shooting in the parking lot, or simply disappearing one night, never to be seen again. Devastated and 5 months pregnant, Johanna poisoned herself in her basement dressing room. The historical evidence for Johanna is problematic. No death certificates, newspaper accounts, or other documentation support her existence. Attempts to connect her to various mob figures of the era have failed. Some researchers suggest she might be a composite of several women who worked at the club over the years, their stories blending into a single tragic narrative. Yet, employees and visitors reported encountering Johanna regularly during the building's operation. She was associated with a specific rose perfume, a cloying, old-fashioned scent that appeared suddenly and overwhelmingly. Witnesses described seeing a beautiful woman in 1950s clothing in the basement mirrors, always with an expression of profound sadness. She seemed particularly drawn to pregnant women, who often reported feeling uncomfortable or threatened in her presence. After the Latin Quarter closed, the building saw several short-lived incarnations. It briefly operated as a bingo hall, attempting to capitalize on a legal loophole that allowed charity gaming. When that failed, it became a hard rock cafe in the early 1970s, not affiliated with the famous chain, but trading on the name's recognition. The Hard Rock, known locally as the Bloody Bucket, catered to a rough biker crowd. Violence was common both inside and in the parking lot. Multiple shootings occurred during its operation, including at least 2 fatalities. The Wilder police chief at the time, Robert Schindler, told reporters that they had an awful lot of trouble down there. Mostly in the parking lot, where disputes were settled after closing time. The final straw came in 1977 when a patron was killed with a shotgun just outside the entrance. The negative publicity and increased police attention made it impossible to continue operating. The Hard Rock closed its doors, leaving the building vacant once again. Robert Randall Bobby Mackey was born in 1948 in Concord, Kentucky, a tiny railroad town with a current population of just 19 people. Music was in his blood from an early age. At 4, he won 5 Rs at a talent show singing Hank Williams' "Your Cheating Heart." His mother taught him guitar when he was 8, and he spent his youth harmonizing with songs on the jukebox in his father's grocery store. After high school, Bobby worked as a railroad brakeman while playing in bands around Cincinnati. When the railroad laid him off in 1970, he pursued music full-time. By 1978, he'd built a steady following, playing at various Cincinnati clubs. With a wife and a new baby, he faced a choice: move to Nashville to pursue a recording career or establish his own venue for financial security. Bobby had noticed the abandoned building at 44 Licking Pike during his railroad days. He told Discovery Channel producers that he'd always felt strange when passing it on the bus. Something about the place drew his attention. When friends from Wilder suggested he look at the property, he finally went inside. The building was a mess. It had been closed for over a year, and remnants from its various incarnations littered the space. Tables and chairs from the Hard Rock remained set up as if waiting for customers who would never come. Old posters covered the walls. The basement was packed with decades of accumulated junk, but Bobby saw potential. Standing on the stage, he could envision crowds dancing to country music. Bobby and his wife Janet purchased the building in April 1978. Neither believed in ghosts nor knew about the building's violent history. They were simply a young couple starting a business. That innocence wouldn't last long. Carl Lawson walked into Bobby Mackey's life before the club even opened. The 20-year-old had worked at the Hard Rock and lived with his parents nearby. He asked Bobby for work during the renovation, and Bobby, needing help, hired him for cleaning and painting. Despite his odd manner, big glasses, a dreamy air, and a tendency to talk to himself, Carl proved a dedicated worker. As Bobby tells it, the first sign something was wrong came during a casual conversation. Carl mentioned that weird things happened in the building. When pressed, he began describing experiences that made Bobby's blood run cold. Footsteps across the empty dance floor at night, invisible presences in the basement, the sensation of being constantly watched. Bobby's reaction was purely practical. He'd invested everything in his club, and didn't want ghost stories scaring away customers before they even opened. He made Carl promise to keep quiet about the supernatural activity. Carl agreed, but asked to live in the small apartment above the bar. Despite the alleged haunting, or perhaps because of it, he wanted to be close to whatever inhabited the building. Carl moved in before the club's September 1978 opening, sleeping with a brace against his door and a shotgun beside his bed. He began what would become a 34-year relationship with the building's spirits. A relationship that would ultimately destroy him. As Bobby Mackey's music world established itself as a successful honky-tonk, Carl Lawson's relationship with the spirits intensified. He claimed to communicate regularly with multiple entities, learning their names and stories. Johanna was his most frequent companion. He would hold long, one-sided conversations with her, sometimes in front of bewildered employees. Carl's most significant discovery came while cleaning the basement. He found loose floorboards that revealed the old slaughterhouse well. The circular opening was packed with dirt and debris, but clearly visible. To Carl, this wasn't just a historical artifact, it was an active portal to hell. After discovering the well, Carl's behavior became increasingly erratic. Bobby recalled that he'd have to talk to him for a little while to figure out how to deal with him because he was always seemed to be different. Some days Carl was his normal, if odd self. Other days he seemed possessed by different personalities. Employees began reporting their own experiences, many centered around Carl. Roger Heath, a bartender, once saw small handprints appear on Carl's back as if invisible arms were embracing him. The prints were child-sized and remained visible for several minutes before fading. Carl claimed the spirits were growing more aggressive. He showed fellow employees scratches and bruises that appeared overnight. During one incident witnessed by multiple people, Carl was thrown against a wall by an unseen force. He began sleeping less, drinking more, and muttering constantly to invisible companions. By 1989, Carl's stories had attracted the attention of Doug Hensley, a local horror writer who frequented the bar. When Bobby mentioned some of Carl's experiences, Hensley immediately saw book potential. Though Bobby initially resisted, eventually he relented, telling Carl to share everything with Hensley. The stories Carl told were increasingly elaborate. He claimed to have found Johanna's diary hidden under floorboards, detailing her doomed romance and suicide. He described encounters with Pearl Bryan's headless ghost near the well. He spoke of demonic entities that emerged at night to torment him. One called itself Sam Tucker, another simply Charlie. Hensley's first book about Bobby Mackey's came out around 1989, as a small print titled The Terror at Bobby Mackey's Music World. Bobby didn't expect it to go anywhere, but the timing couldn't have been better, or worse, depending on your perspective. The late 1980s and early 1990s saw the height of the satanic panic in America. Media outlets seriously reported on supposed networks of devil worshippers. Law enforcement received training on identifying satanic crimes. In this environment, a book about a demon-haunted nightclub with connections to possible occult murders was guaranteed attention. The media came calling. In 1991, Bobby, Janet, and Carl appeared on The Jerry Springer Show to discuss the haunting. The next year, it was Geraldo. Each appearance brought more attention, more visitors, and more reported supernatural experiences. Hensley incorporated these new accounts into expanding editions of his book. The final version, Hell's Gate, Terror at Bobby Mackey's Music World, published in 2005, had grown into a comprehensive chronicle of every reported ghost sighting, complete with notarized statements from witnesses. By 1993, Carl Lawson's mental state had deteriorated significantly, and friends and family convinced him to undergo an exorcism, believing he was genuinely possessed by the building's evil spirits. The first attempt was performed by Reverend Glenn Cole, a Pentecostal minister who later described Bobby Mackey's as the most evil site I've ever stepped foot on. The exorcism was filmed with reporters present, just in case anything happens. During the ritual, witnesses reported Carl's palms pressed hard against a table, his head nodding rhythmically as he mumbled in a low, different voice. His eyes remained fixed on the Reverend with an expression observers found deeply unsettling. As Reverend Cole commanded the spirits to leave, Carl's body began jerking and spasming. Different voices seemed to speak through him, the snarling Sam Tucker, the raspy Charlie, and others. After hours of prayer and struggle, Carl collapsed. When he came to, he claimed to feel different, cleansed. The relief was temporary. Within weeks, Carl reported the spirits had returned with 7 more, making his situation worse than before. A second exorcism attempt involved weeks of prayer sessions. During one, Carl discovered his underwear soaked with blood from spontaneous hemorrhoids that Hensley described as tremendous in size, growing and spreading like poison ivy. The exorcisms failed to provide lasting relief. Carl lived above the bar until 2012, his mental health steadily declining. He developed severe alcoholism, which friends attributed to his attempts to cope with constant supernatural harassment. He died in 2012, having spent over 30 years documenting and living with what he believed were the ghosts and demons of Bobby Mackey's. The 2008 premiere episode of Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures brought Bobby Mackey's to a new generation of paranormal enthusiasts. Host Zach Bagans and his crew employed an aggressive investigative style, provoking spirits and daring them to manifest. During filming, Bagans received 3 long scratches down his back, captured on camera. The episode's success spawned 2 sequels and cemented Bobby Mackey's reputation as the most haunted nightclub in America. Until the building's demolition, the club's resident paranormal investigators were Gatekeeper Paranormal, a team of 4 women who took a more scientific approach. Laura Rowland, Angela Johnson, Mandy Loftus, and Kim Short began leading tours in 2014, focusing on historical accuracy and respectful investigative methods. The team documented extensive EVPs, electronic voice phenomena. One recording captured a female voice with a southern accent whispering, "She does not like all these people here." They filmed shadowy figures, glowing orbs, and mists, particularly around the sealed well. Unlike more sensational investigators, they noted that aggressive provocation only increased violent activity. Their investigations revealed patterns in the haunting activity intensified around the well area. Where many experienced dizziness and nausea, the dressing rooms maintained constant activity with rose perfume manifesting suddenly. Pregnant women reported particular discomfort, sometimes followed by miscarriages. Electronic equipment regularly malfunctioned, especially near the well. Physical attacks increased when spirits were provoked or disrespected. The basement remained the epicenter of activity until the end. During tours, visitors reported being pushed, scratched, or having hair pulled by invisible hands, seeing full-bodied apparitions, particularly a headless woman, hearing phantom music from the Latin Quarter area, experiencing overwhelming emotions, sudden sadness or rage, and feeling invisible hands trying to push them toward the well. The Wall of Faces became a popular stop on ghost tours. Water damage on the concrete wall had created patterns that resolved into faces when viewed from certain angles. While skeptics attributed this to pareidolia, the tendency to see patterns in random data, believers claimed the faces represented trapped spirits. The supernatural activity at Bobby Mackey's extracted a real toll on those who spent significant time there. Carl Lawson paid the ultimate price, dying broken and alcoholic after 3 decades of claimed demonic torment. His picture still hung above the bar until the demolition, and some employees reported sensing his presence, though whether as protector or another trapped soul remained debated. Janet Mackey never recovered from her experiences. Though she occasionally visited after Bobby hired security to accompany her, she never felt comfortable in the building. She passed away in 2009 after a long illness, having spent most of her marriage avoiding the business that defined her husband's career. Multiple employees quit after frightening encounters. Several investigators reported physical injuries, scratches, bruises, and in one case, a broken ankle from being pushed down the stairs. The psychological impact may have been worse. Former employees described nightmares, anxiety, and the sensation of being followed home by malevolent presences. The accounts range from relatively mild to terrifying. Multiple people reported the jukebox playing the anniversary song while unplugged, a song the machine didn't even contain. Others described being touched, pushed, or scratched by invisible hands. Several people claimed their cars mysteriously failed in the parking lot, only to start normally once tarred away from the building. One of the most dramatic incidents involved a patron named J.R. Costigan. While washing his hands in the men's bathroom, he looked in the mirror and saw a dark-haired man with a rope around his neck. The apparition attacked him, punching and kicking until Costigan lost consciousness. When he came to, he immediately reported the incident to Bobby. Costigan was so shaken he sued Bobby Mackey for maintaining dangerous supernatural conditions without proper warning. The case went to court, where Bobby's lawyer filed a motion to dismiss written entirely in verse. The plaintiff claims in his petition he was assaulted by an apparition, injured by a ghostly nemesis on Bobby Mackey's premises. Alice, this essence, disembodied, followed the plaintiff to the men's potty, where the dark-haired haunt with neck and noose soundly kicked complainant's drunk caboose. Though the case was dismissed, the judge suggested Costigan take the matter up with a higher power. Bobby took the precaution of posting a warning sign that remained until the building's demolition. Even skeptics acknowledged the building's oppressive atmosphere. On certain nights, employees refused to go to the basement alone. The mood could shift suddenly from festive to threatening, sending shivers through staff who'd worked there for years. Throughout it all, Bobby Mackey maintained his skepticism. In interviews, his demeanor changed noticeably when discussing the paranormal. The twinkle left his eyes. His manner became abrupt. He never personally experienced anything supernatural in his club, though he admitted the building had gotten a hold of him in its own way. His perspective was pragmatic. Ghost stories brought customers, and customers bought drinks and paid cover charges. He charged paranormal investigators hefty fees for overnight access. Ghost tours ran 5 nights a week when the club wasn't featuring live music. If people wanted to believe in ghosts, Bobby would happily take their money while he played Hank Williams covers on stage. Yet there were hints Bobby knew more than he admitted. He recorded Johanna in 2010, a haunting ballad about the ghostly dancer. No, some may not believe it. And I won't say it's true, but some of us have smelled your rose perfume. When asked why he wrote it, he simply said the story inspired him musically. Until its final days, Bobby ran his club Friday and Saturday nights as it was meant to be. A honky-tonk where people drank beer and danced to country music. His band, billed as the best damn band in the land, played country music with Bobby's rich voice carrying songs of heartbreak and redemption. For those nights, Bobby Mackey's music world was just a bar with great music and a mechanical bull. The other 5 nights belonged to the ghosts. Despite extensive investigation, core mysteries remained unsolved when the building came down. Pearl Bryan's head had never been found. The well remained sealed, its depths unexplored. Bobby resisted suggestions to use ground-penetrating radar or fiber optic cameras, saying he didn't want to disturb whatever might be down there. The true identity of Johanna remains unknown. Historical researchers have found no documentation supporting her existence, yet hundreds of people claim to have encountered her. The rose perfume appeared without explanation, sometimes so strong it drove people from the basement. The source of the violent antagonism toward pregnant women defied explanation. Janet Mackey, Pearl Bryan, and the legendary Johanna were all pregnant when they met their fates at or near the building. Modern visitors reported miscarriages after basement tours with disturbing frequency. Most puzzling was why this particular location attracted such darkness. From its slaughterhouse origins through bootlegging, mob violence, and modern hauntings, the building seemed to draw tragedy like a magnet. Some suggested the limestone geology created conditions conducive to paranormal activity. Others believed the blood-soaked ground itself was cursed. Carl Lawson believed he knew the answer, that the well was literally a portal to hell, allowing demonic entities free passage into our world. His death ended the most direct communication with whatever inhabited Bobby Mackey's, leaving only questions and the occasional terrified tourist. The demolition of Bobby Mackey's on December 6, 2024, marked the end of an era for northern Kentucky. As the yellow Caterpillar front loaders smashed through the brittle wood, television crews captured the final moments of what many considered the most haunted nightclub in America. Bobby and his wife Denise watched from a distance as their 45-year legacy crumbled to rubble. "It's bittersweet, for sure," Bobby told reporters that day, watching the building that had defined his life collapse. The mechanical bull had been auctioned off, the famous warning sign removed, and the basement with its infamous well buried under tons of debris. When asked about the spirits that allegedly haunted the building, Bobby's response was characteristically pragmatic. "I guess they'll go wherever they want to." But Laura Rowland from Gatekeeper Paranormal, who led ghost tours for 10 years, speculated. "Many people think that the spirits are attached to the land, and that whatever is built on this property, the spirits will still be here." She believes the demolition leaves not only debris but some ghostly questions, remarking, "There's a very good chance that the new club will be haunted as well. They are preserving the portal to hell and the wall of faces," she says. "So, anything haunting those pieces of building will remain likely." The club had temporarily relocated to Florence earlier in 2024, but the new location lacks the dark history and oppressive atmosphere of the original. Without the blood-soaked basement, the sealed well, and over a century of accumulated tragedy, it's just another honky-tonk, exactly what Bobby always claimed he wanted. Yeah, heat. Out near Somerville, Georgia, lies what remains of Corpsewood Manor, a house built by Dr. Charles Lee Scudder and his partner Joseph Odom. Charles Scudder was born on October 6, 1926 in Wausau, Wisconsin. In the 1940s, he attended Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio, and was involved with the school's drama program. There, he met Helen Kilbourne Hazlitt, and the two were married on September 10, 1946. But the marriage soon ended in divorce. In the 1950s, Scudder remarried Bort Bunting, daughter of British modernist poet Basil Bunting. That marriage also ended in divorce after having 4 sons together. Scudder was a student of Loyola University under Dr. Alexander Karksmar, a neuroscientist who was professor and chairman of the Department of Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics at Loyola and director of its Institute for Mind, Drugs and Behavior. After graduating, Scudder became associate director of the Institute for Mind, Drugs and Behavior and worked as an associate professor. Years later, Karksmar would describe his student, friend, and colleague as quite eccentric. He kept a pet monkey and dyed his hair odd colors. He believed in the unity of the universe, and published the results of his experiments on that subject. He was also an accomplished harp player and had been invited to play with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Scudder also owned a mansion on West Adams Street in Chicago, which he filled with Baroque furniture he had bought when the Balaban and Katz Chicago Theater was liquidating its furniture collection. In 1959, he hired Joseph Odom to help with the kids, and the two continued living together in the mansion well into the 1970s. When Scudder's children were adults, Dr. Scudder grew tired of university politics, medical students who grew more unruly and less interested in learning, and the daily hustle of the big city. He took solace in his garden and enjoyed the frequent visits from the city's little wildlife. His partner, Joseph Odom, had always enjoyed a simpler life and had an inherent dislike for anything modern. After some conversations, the couple decided to move out to the country, with the glamour of 4 seasons but without super cold winters. Somewhere isolated where they could live off the grid. After months of studying geological maps of southern states and contacting local realtors, Scudder found a plot of land at the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, surrounded by national forest land. There was no running water, phone, or electricity available, and the only way to the property was via a long winding, old logging road. While still lecturing at Loyola University, he bought the land, had a well dug, planned his house, and bought a small camper and a Jeep. In 1976, on his 50th birthday, Scudder resigned from his position at Loyola University. He auctioned off all the furniture and possessions he didn't care about, gave away all his electrical appliances, sold his home in Chicago, and arranged for a moving company to handle the things he decided to keep. Scudder and Odom, along with their 2 English Mastiffs, left for Georgia in the midst of a terrible blizzard. They lost their way several times during the trip, and when they did get there, they couldn't locate the property. Lost and stranded in the wilderness, they made camp to wait out the blizzard. When the storm finally cleared, they found the corpse of a horse along the old logging road. And so they appropriately named the road Dead Horse Road. Dr. Scudder and Joseph Odom took in the beauty of the bare, haunting trees around them and named their new home Corpsewood. Living out of a camper, Scudder and Odom set out on building their castle in the country. As Scudder would describe it in an article he wrote in 1981 for Mother Earth News during the construction of the house, 45,000 bricks were laid by hand, 3 layers thick with a 2-inch wide airspace between the layers for insulation. They dug trenches and installed pipes for sinks, a tile drainage system, and a chemical toilet, which was later enclosed in a brick outhouse. By the end of summer, the pair were able to move into the first floor, which contained the kitchen, dining room, and living room. The next year, they put a roof over the 2 upstairs bedrooms, which were reached by a circular stairwell illuminated by stained glass. Along with the 2-story house, they had also built several outbuildings, including a 3-story chicken coop. The first floor of the coop was for poultry and food storage. The second floor was for canned goods and the couple's pornography collection. The top floor was nicknamed the Pink Room, furnished with mattresses and pink linens where the couple would entertain guests. Being the eccentric that he was, Scudder was interested in the occult, having decorated Corpsewood Manor with satanic artifacts and other occult items, and drove around with a pentagram painted on the side of his Jeep. Despite this, Scudder never identified as a Satanist and instead was an atheist who related to the belief system of Anton LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan and the religion of LaVeyan Satanism. As practiced by the Church of Satan, they did not worship a deity but instead worshipped oneself, and the devil is used as a symbol of humankind's inner desires. A few months before their impending murders, Scudder had painted a self-portrait bound with duct tape over his mouth, with what looked like 5 bullet holes in his head, which many speculate was a premonition of his own death. Local hunters regularly passed through their property, and would ask them for permission to hunt on their land, many of whom enjoyed their hospitality and homemade wine. One of these hunters was Kenneth Avery Brock. The lifestyle Scudder and Odom enjoyed led Brock to believe that the couple were millionaires, when in fact they had spent all of their savings on their secluded homestead and were living on just $200 a month. In late 1982, Avery Brock moved into the trailer home of Samuel, Tony, West and told West about the queer devil worshippers, who he believed were hoarding a fortune in their home. The pair hatched a plan to rob the couple and put their plan into motion on the night of December 12, 1982. On the way out to Corpsewood Manor, they picked up the .22 Remington rifle from Brock's mother and told her they were going to hunt rabbits. They then picked up West's nephew Joey Wells and his date, Teresa Hudgens, whose later testimony had no idea what was about to transpire later that evening. On their way out to Corpsewood, the 4 of them huffed a combination of alcohol, paint thinner, and glue known locally as Tuttle. Upon their arrival, they were greeted by Scudder, who took them up to the Pink Room, where they sat around drinking Scudder and Odom's homemade wine while Odom was in the main house cleaning up after supper. It wasn't long before Brock supposedly said he was going out to his truck to get some Tuttle, when in fact, he went to fetch the rifle. He returned, and upon seeing the gun, Scudder, probably a little intoxicated from all the drinking, giggled and said, "Bang bang," before he was held at knife point in order to give up the location of his money. Wells and Hudgens were terrified and ran down to their car, but the engine refused to start. Brock went down into the main house's kitchen, where he surprised Odom, shooting him 4 times as well as killing the couple's 2 mastiffs. Bound and gagged, Scudder was taken into Corpsewood Manor, where he was met by the body of his dead partner. Brock led Scudder into the library, pulled down the gag from his mouth, and sat in a chair. Scudder stood up and shuffled toward Odom's body. West ordered him to stop. Scudder continued on, uttering his last words, "I asked for this." West shot him in the head at close range, dropping Scudder to his knees. Another shot sent Scudder reeling into a bookcase before he was shot 3 more times in the head. After the brutal slayings, the house was ransacked looking for the hidden fortune. They tried taking Scudder's gold-encrusted harp, but it was too heavy and too big to take with them. The two perpetrators left with only a handful of coins, some jewelry, silver candelabras, and a gold-plated dagger before fleeing in Scudder's black Jeep. The bodies of Charles Scudder and Joseph Odom would not be found until 2 days later, when their friend Raymond Williams visited Corpsewood to notify the couple of the passing of a friend in Rome, Georgia. After noticing bullet holes in the kitchen door, he went back down the mountain and called the sheriff's office. The same day, Teresa Hudgens came forward to the police, and a nationwide manhunt ensued. Heading westward, Brock and West decided to ditch their getaway vehicle for something less conspicuous. At a rest stop in Bonva, Mississippi, they kidnapped Navy Lieutenant Kirby Phelps with the intention of tying him to a tree and stealing his vehicle. While Brock was unloading the Jeep, West shot Phelps twice. While in Austin, Texas, the two men argued about their plan and split up. Brock voluntarily surrendered to police in Marietta, Georgia, on December 20th, and West was arrested in Chattanooga, Tennessee, on Christmas Day. While investigating the murder scene, law enforcement officials found 2 human skulls, 3 vials allegedly filled with LSD-25, numerous occult tools, a small occult library, a large general academic and literature library, and a large collection of homosexual pornography at Corpsewood Manor. According to news reports at the time, the Chattooga County Sheriff's Office labeled Scudder and Odom as devil worshippers. Sheriff Gary McConnell had tried to bring charges against Dr. Scudder and Joseph Odom in the past for their odd behavior and beliefs, but was unable to because of the First Amendment regarding freedom of religion. As the trial was underway, Scudder and Odom were labeled homosexual devil worshippers by the media and the general public. With their lifestyle and interest in Satanism, they became easy targets of the satanic panic that was sweeping the nation at the time. According to Magistrate Blanche Barton of the Church of Satan, Diga, LaVey was enraged and grieved by the injustice of what happened to them. LaVey viewed the murders as evidence that there were still areas in the United States where eccentrics were attacked for holding beliefs outside of the norm. During the trial, the defense accused Dr. Scudder of spiking the wine with LSD in order to try and have oral sex with them. The bottle of wine was tested by law enforcement and tested negative for LSD or any other hallucinogens. When that failed, West argued he was involuntarily intoxicated. The defense went as far as to say on the matter of the supposed drugging, he had a motive because he was a homosexual. Prosecutors pointed to the fact that West had confessed to a Georgia Bureau of Investigation agent that he and Brock had planned the robbery and murders just a few days prior. West told the GBI agent that Brock wanted to kill Scudder because Scudder had once engaged in oral sex with him. During his confession, West also said, "All I can say is they were devils and I killed them. That's how I feel about it." Scudder's old colleague and friend, Dr. Karksmar, was also contacted during the trial and attested that Dr. Scudder was not a drug abuser, nor was he a devil worshipper, and had actually been the type of person to disapprove of drug use. While the brutal murders of Scudder and Odom were deemed justifiable in the eyes of the public, the murder of Kirby Phelps was not. Kenneth Avery Brock pleaded guilty and received 3 consecutive life sentences. West was convicted of double homicide and sentenced to death, but not having the right number of women on the jury led to a retrial. In the second trial, West was sentenced to life in prison. Brock is currently serving his life sentence at the Coffee Correctional Facility, while West is currently serving his life sentence at Wilcox State Prison. Both have been denied parole multiple times. A small private funeral was held at Corpsewood, where Odom's ashes were scattered in the Rose Garden. Dr. Scudder's ashes were taken back to Wisconsin by his sister Janet Scudder Arnold, where they were buried in the family plot. Famed defense attorney Bobby Lee Cook of Somerville, Georgia, was hired by Scudder's sons to represent their claim to the estate. Odom's sister also claimed the estate, as Scudder's will had left everything to her. Scudder's golden, encrusted harp and a bronze statue of Mephistopheles from Corpsewood are currently in the possession of Bobby Lee Cook. Although we have heard about the strange and tragic events that transpired in Georgia and Kentucky through these aforementioned tales, the belief that evil exists in its rudimentary forms cannot be denied. Selfishness and greed pervade both of these stories. The emotions exist, but some are more actionable than others. Perhaps Scott Jackson experienced an unrequited love with Pearl Bryan. But this love didn't mean that Pearl had to be subjected to not only an undeserving degradation but, after her life was taken, a desecration of the vessel that held new life. In the case of Corpsewood Manor, Charles Scudder's last words, when grieving his partner, Joseph Odom, that somehow they deserved the fate of homicide leaves more questions than answers. The two men desperately sought an off-the-grid existence. living in an isolated setting and experiencing life at its most bare level. Perhaps the friendship he tried to cultivate with his killers proved to be their undoing. If you get a hankering to research more into these stories, may I suggest a book entitled The Corpsewood Manor Murders in North Georgia, by Amy Patchula, or Hell's Gate Terror at Bobby Mackey's by Douglas Hensley. And don't forget the books by yours truly. Dark Bayou. Infamous Louisiana Homicides and Bloodstained Louisiana 12 Homicides 1896 to 1934. These are available at Barnes & Noble, Exposit Books, McFarland Publishing and Walmart online. And I have an announcement for you: we have merch. We have t-shirts. Yes, t-shirts. History's Dark Chronicles t-shirts. They come in either gray with red or hot orange writing, or they can be black with lime green, whatever you prefer. If you would like one, they're done print to order, which means they're printed when you order them. You can get through to me via the email address on the site and tell me your size. We can do Venmo, and we'll get it shipped to you as soon as possible. If you want it signed, let me know, I can sign them for you as well. So until next time.